views expressed on this program by its guests do not necessarily reflect the views or beliefs of the host or radio network. And this program's sole intent is to help educate, foster critical debate, and help raise and discuss political and social issues which already exist in the public domain. Thank you and enjoy the program.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network and also at 21stCenturyWire.com. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 343 of this weekly Omnibus News and Analysis radio program brought to you here on ACR, the Alternate Current Radio Network. Again, I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We've got a powerful broadcast lined up for you today. We'll go through some of the big breaking stories in the first hour, and we're also going to preview the special new edition of New Dawn magazine. This is the Great Reset edition. This has just hit newsstands in Australia and New Zealand, but it's also now available online on the PDF version basically today, I think. We've got a link on the show page to it. It's a powerful magazine, and it's already making waves in Australia. It's made quite an impact already. It's been out for a week, and there's been incredible sales, and people have just kind of gravitated towards this edition. Maybe it's because of the timing of it and what's going on down under in Australia, but we'll preview some of the features in there. I was also guest editor of this edition, by the way. Great publication, obviously the great publishers and editors at New Dawn magazine. We'll talk a little bit about that later in the first hour, and I will do a short reading from some or segments of some of the features in here. It's absolutely amazing. But in the second hour, we will be joined by Brother Basil for the first sermon of the Universal Church of the New Normal and the Holy Sacred Corona. So we'll be doing a Sunday sermon in the second hour. Very much looking forward to that. And so it'll be a first for us. So we're going to have a little bit of a reflection on life in the time of Corona in the second hour. So the first Mass for the Church of the New Normal. So comply. So let's look at what happened this week. This week was unbelievable. I mean, I don't know if I can take much more of this. If you're getting dizzy, I'm getting dizzy. I'm getting dizzy just trying to keep up with what's going on. Was hoping for a non-eventful week in elections after the first presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, but unfortunately that didn't happen. The debate itself was an absolute slugfest. Chris Wallace, who's Fox News' establishment gatekeeper, of course, he was the moderator. CNN was hosting it. It was a very strange combination. So it's amazing how, television networks run and operated by spooks can be hosting presidential debates in a so-called democracy. I find that just to be unbelievable, but that's the situation we have in the U.S. So it was a slugfest. Trump didn't abide by any of the debate rules, of course, and just tried to steamroll Joe Biden. And let's be honest, that's not too difficult to do these days. But Joe fought back. A few counter punches from Biden, from Uncle Joe, didn't hit very hard, but he tried. And Donald Trump basically talked over him at every given opportunity. But you know what? Considering what's going on in the background right now in Washington, in terms of the investigations being mounted by the Department of Justice, following the collapse of Russiagate, and what can only be described as a phony impeachment effort by the House late last fall, actually a year ago, which ran and wasted about 3 or 4 months of our country's time right into February. That collapsed, and now very close to getting to the bottom of what really happened with the whole Russiagate fiasco. And it turns out it very much goes right to the top at the time, to the White House, Barack Obama's White House. And Joe Biden was vice president then, and he is also apparently implicated in some of this. So, I mean, there was one segment of this debate. When I heard this, I almost spit out my coffee and choked on my McVitie's biscuit. I couldn't believe what I heard. Donald Trump basically declared war on the Democrats and on Biden, literally pulled it all up and implicated Biden himself right there on stage. I mean, he did go after Hunter Biden, the son of Joe, who's got a very spotty record. And Biden clearly wasn't comfortable with that. But it was, well, I don't want to say the word, but it starts with S, ends with T. It's a 4-letter word. And after that, you put show, and you get a blank show. That's really what the debate was. But then the country itself is really, politically, is a show itself. So it was only fitting that the two reflected each other. But listen to this clip. Now, this is, the only way I can describe this is a Biden coup. This is Trump putting his foot in the door of a Democratic coup. And this was a very important clip out of the debate. Listen closely. I mean, imagine this on national TV. When have you ever heard this or seen this in your life? I mean, we've seen things that we've never seen or heard or expected to see in our lives, but this was something. Listen to this clip.
They were a disaster. They were a disgrace to our country. And we've caught them. We've caught them all. We've got it all on tape. We've caught them all. And by the way, you gave the idea for the Logan Act against General Flynn. You better take a look at that, because we caught you in a sense. And President Obama was sitting in the office. He knew about it too. So don't tell me about a free transition.
Wow. So that's war. That's war, basically. That's the Trump White House basically not pulling any punches, putting it on the table. And so, Pete, how could you sit back and hear that? How can you sit back knowing what's gone down in the last 4 years in terms of fake scandals and the revelations that a sitting president, Barack Obama's administration, spied, used the FBI, ginned up fake FISA warrants to spy on the Trump campaign, the Republican challenger against Hillary Clinton? I mean, this is just crazy. And we've known this all the time. We've been talking about it. Of course, certain media outlets have been talking about this for years. But, if you watch any of the mainstream outlets, particularly on the sort of the Democrat-oriented outlets, you won't. It's almost as if this has never happened. They literally don't cover what they don't want to cover that might be, politically inconvenient or embarrassing for the Democrat side of government and the ticket and so forth. They just ignore it. But it happened. And what does that mean? I mean, they talk about Trump as being fascist and all of the rest of it. But what happened there was really crossing a red line, probably in the worst way you could imagine. Now, mind you, maybe Donald Trump brought the worst out of the Democrats in the Obama White House. Maybe so. But that's no excuse to cross over that red line. Because if you do that level of abuse of power, you undermine the judiciary, you undermine the whole system of justice, you undermine the rule of law, the office of the presidency. I mean, everything just goes out the window, and it did. And it didn't stop during the 2016 campaign. They kept on with it. They kept on with it right through the whole Mueller charade, and then even made up an impeachment charge and went through that whole circus for how many months that took and how much oxygen that sucked up in terms of the media. And meanwhile, the country is coming apart at the seams. So this is why it's relevant. So I think, and then after that, the day after that, Friday morning, Donald Trump, they announced Donald Trump and the First Lady tested positive for COVID. And I just thought to myself, you got to be kidding me. You really got to be kidding me. So off they went, spirited away to the presidential medical center where they're being surrounded by men in white coats doing press conferences. We'll say some more about the men in white coats a little bit later. And so there we go. So we went from that wild, raucous debate right to Donald Trump, basically the president, getting COVID. Now, what does this mean for the campaign? Well, it means possibly a pause. I mean, I'm looking at this different ways. I mean, Donald Trump gave a statement, went to the press directly, press conference from the hospital itself. He's wearing his shirt, jacket, whatever. He looked all right. Sounded a bit hoarse, but he looked all right, sounded all right. And so it's definitely what it has done in terms of the media optics is Donald Trump has just sucked all of the press coverage towards him in a way that only he can do. The master of the media basically did it again. Now, whether this is intentional, if this is a genuine COVID case, I mean, let's be honest. If you tested all of the people in Washington, I bet you could probably find, if you use PCR testing, you'd probably find about 20% of the people of the White House and just about the whole general population will test PCR positive. So the president gets tested regularly, I would imagine. So he tests PCR positive. What are his symptoms? I don't know. It's not clear. We heard he might have symptoms, and then there's mixed reports coming from Mark Meadows, the White House spokesperson. Is it serious? Is it not serious? How's the president changing? And they're driving the media crazy through this process. So I'm looking at this analytically. And by the way, I said this on Friday on the UK column, right when we heard the news. We went to air on Friday with Mike Robinson. And what did I say? I said that, for me, something is, testing PCR positive for coronavirus, that's not like, of all the major threats to one's health, even at Trump's age at 74. And by the way, he seemed pretty sprightly during that debate. He didn't look like he was sick. So he was running circles around Biden and Chris Wallace. Completely dominated it. Lots of energy. Didn't look like he was, out of sorts at all. But in terms of threats to health or personal safety, PCR positive isn't necessarily very high on the list, even of health conditions. I know it's been made a big deal in the media. Yes, we get that. This is the whole campaign that they've been running, the propaganda campaign for the last 7 months. We get that. But in terms of national security, President of the United States, you would not want to disclose that information unless it was incredibly serious. Now, we look back at some similar situations in the past, things that I can remember. I'm giving away my age a little bit, but when Ronald Reagan was president, Reagan didn't have a whole bunch of serious health scares, at least three to four separate incidences where, Ronald Reagan could have basically bought the farm at any point. Let's straight off the bat, when he was shot supposedly by John Hinckley Jr. That was very early on in his first term. When Reagan was shot, that was a big thing. So yeah, he could have died. The bullet probably missed his major artery by something like a couple of millimeters. Okay, then you have a major situation there, and I think at the time, my memory serves me correctly, but I might be wrong. The vice president was George Bush Sr., George Herbert Walker Bush, H.W. Bush Sr., was the vice president. The vice president was out of Washington at the time. And so third in command at that moment was, I believe, Secretary of State Alexander Haig. I might be wrong, but I remember Haig going to the media and saying, "I'm in charge for whatever that 3-hour period or whatever, where the vice president was off or away, or who knows, maybe he was on the ranch in Texas." And so you had this third man appear and basically saying, "I'm in charge." And so the country was, I mean, this is at the height of the Cold War. This is when we were told anyway that the U.S. and the Soviet Union, we've all have, a few thousand nuclear warheads pointed at each other. I mean, that's what life was like back then. And it wasn't, it was a big deal. But of course, everything gets amplified more now because we're just drenched in more media, social media, mainstream media. We're being pelted constantly, and everybody is like hysterical at the drop of a hat these days. I mean, it could be anything. So why would you, unless it was a life-threatening situation, why would you even disclose such a thing? Because for America's enemies to know that Donald Trump is incapacitated and is compromised, I mean, that's, if you're a war hawk or a neocon, of course, that's out of bounds. It should be anyway. So wouldn't you kind of keep that hush-hush? If you PCR positive doesn't mean that you're a case, doesn't mean that you even have an infection. So maybe he does. Maybe he is a case. Maybe he does have an actual infection. Maybe this was cross-referenced with symptoms. Maybe there was clinical diagnosis to go with the PCR test. So, I mean, it's possible. Of course, the president will have the best medical care that anyone would have in the country, one would think, unless they're so crazy and this thing has gone so out of whack that they bundled him away on a PCR test. That would be very disturbing if that was the case. We don't know what the real case is. So I'm thinking to myself, why would you even announce it unless it was serious? Because he's the president. Unless everybody thinks in Washington that, even in the administration, do they think it's the Black Death? Do they think that coronavirus is the bubonic plague? Because if that's the case, then we have a serious problem. Houston, we got a massive problem. So these are the questions that went through my head at the time. Then I'm thinking, well, is Trump just electioneering? Is he really pivoting what looked like, after quite a shaky performance on the debate stage, in terms of he didn't come off very well, a lot of energy, but he as Trump normally does, he missed about 10 slam dunks. He could have put Biden away about 10 times, and Trump never finishes off the dunk, basically. He very rarely does. He goes off on some tangent or ends up, stepping on his own foot, and then tries through brute force just to steamroll his opponent like any way. So what's going on here? Now, this could get really dangerous, of course, if, for instance, Joe Biden announces that he has coronavirus. Because if this is the case, then the media would then blame Trump for spreading it to Biden, poor, vulnerable Biden, 78 years old, spreading it to him on the debate stage. And so the immediately after Trump announced this, the media were like, well, he knew he had it before the debate. He put CNN staff and the Bidens and everybody there at risk, and et cetera. So this was the talking point immediately. So what did he know? When did he know it? Sort of thing. And so then they're hunting down people who were in Trump's orbit now to see if they've caught COVID. And believe me, if they can find someone that, especially if they could get him into a hospital or find them in a hospital or something, I mean, that would be the national story. They'd be a martyr. And God forbid if someone had some other comorbidities and ended up getting sick and dying, then the media, the CNNs, the MSNBCs of the world would accuse Trump of murder, basically, because he didn't get tested soon enough. So they're running with the hysteria of COVID and totally politicizing it and making it like, for some reason, this is like the Black Death that's airborne, basically. So an airborne death sentence. So they've reverted back to this level of hysteria because Trump's involved, basically, and it's in the heat of the election. There's only 4 weeks left. So If Biden got infected, I mean, imagine if Biden got sick, and imagine if Biden died. I mean, I know these are strange scenarios, but we've seen some strange things. That would be if something like that happened, they'd turn him into a martyr. It'd be like Ruth Bader Ginsburg times 20. If Trump got sick and had some complications, end up, who knows, not making it. Obviously, there would be parties and celebrations on the left, and they'd be like declaring victory. I mean, it would get really dark, basically. So, obviously, you don't want to see any of this happen. We just want to see two people go do the race. Everyone go to the polls on election day. And not like postal votes that are trickling in on November 10th, which is exactly what's happening. Now, months ago, if you listen to this show, you'll know that months ago, we said on this show, those of our loyal listeners remember this, I said that in August, I think it was the beginning of August, I said something is going to happen in the heat of right up to around the election time that's going to disrupt the election, and it's going to be COVID related, and it will throw the election results somehow into question, or throw the process into question. I forgot what episode it was. We'll try to dig that up and find that clip again. Now, I still believe that. Now, I thought at the time this was going to be the postal vote artificial scandal that the Democrats have been, and Nancy Pelosi is the first in the front line on this one, pushing postal votes. Wants massive amount of people to vote by post because the media and the Democratic leadership have inserted the idea into the public that going to the polls and voting on election day is not safe because of COVID, because we're in a, quote, pandemic. That idea has been put out, and so the result of this is that they said, but it's okay, well, we're going to get more postal votes out to people. So the problem is that the votes, this isn't, as we said before, we outlined this issue previously, before we have absentee ballots, it was a type of a postal vote, but it's only for a very small amount of people, a small minority of people. It's not like massive amount of, we're talking about a large percentage of the electorate voting by post. That's not the way it was done before. But they wanted to move the goalpost for this election. So why is this a problem? Well, it's quite simple. If you require the vote to be postmarked by November 3rd, election day, that means that it might not be received or be counted as late as November 10th, over a week, a week after polling day. So if you have 10 or 20% of the votes hanging in limbo a week after the election, that means that quite a few states could hold up calling results. Democratic states, for instance, you see where I'm going here, could hold up calling for the results. And what could happen in the interim there? Anything could happen. Look at what happened in post-George Floyd. Had 3 or 4 American cities were burning. You had rioting. You had the police. You had to have the National Guard be called out in Los Angeles and other places. I mean, it was a national emergency. Multiply that times 4. Multiply that times 10. And that's what you might see if this scenario is allowed to happen. So the COVID prediction I made about the disruption of the election, I still don't think that it's Trump in the hospital right now. I don't think that's the disruption. It's possible, but I don't think so. I think it's going to be the postal vote. Now, the Democrats have a couple of these coup plots planned, and they have, these have to be done in the open somewhat because they involve tinkering with the democratic process. So here's another one here. This was tweeted out by Leslie McAdoo Gordon. This is on our Twitter feed as well. She's a lawyer with, quote, security clearances and former federal law official. She's saying, this is what she said. You may have seen recently that Nancy Pelosi has been campaigning in Michigan. She wasn't just doing that to support Joe Biden. The Democrats are preparing for a scenario in which the House of Representatives has to choose the president under the U.S. Constitution. Wow. Well, this is interesting. I haven't heard about this before. Let's go further. What else does this former federal law official have to say? Leslie McAdoo Gordon. She's saying that could happen if the Electoral College votes are tied 269 to 269, or neither candidate receives 270 electoral votes, which could, in theory, be the case if one or more states cannot get its electors together by the deadline in order to cast their votes. Therein lies the rub. So, states not getting their electors together by the deadline in order to cast their votes. Now, why would that be? What would cause such a delay? Well, we just told you before this what would cause such a delay. A postal votes fiasco could do the job. So in that situation, she goes on, the House of Representatives chooses the president, but it does not do so by each member of the House voting. It does so by each state casting one vote. So to win, the candidate needs to get 26 or more states to vote for him. Presumably, to cast its one vote, the delegation from each state confers with its own members and decides by majority vote which candidate it will vote for. So there are no rules for that anywhere to my knowledge, she says. For example, Washington State has 10 members of Congress. They decide together how to vote Washington's one vote. In the state of Washington, 7 members are Democratic and 3 are Republican. So Washington state delegation would presumably vote for Biden, as an example. So you can see, you repeat this over and over. You have all these subplots for each state. I mean, this could get, if it went to this level, this would just be completely off the chain. I don't think the media or the country could survive. If this drama was drawn out for weeks or months, and a result wasn't called in this political environment, it's explosive. It's incendiary. Anything could happen. Someone could get shot or killed, and then you have another George Floyd kind of religious experience going on, and it could get violent, basically. And then what? Then calls for the Trump to step down. And so what do you have? We talked about this weeks ago. You have a color revolution. You have a color revolution in the U.S. Now, the U.S., the CIA, the State Department have executed this exact scenario many times, but in foreign countries, in order to enact regime change against democratically elected, many times, governments that the U.S. didn't like and wanted to replace and put their own puppet in. And few Americans ever thought that they would attempt this in the U.S. Now, in the last election, 2016, a CIA operative jumped into the race to try to take the state of Utah, to take the electoral votes. Now, it potentially was very close electorally between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in 2016. And Evan McMullin, a former CIA operative who did regime change in Syria, that was his department, working with the, quote, moderate rebels. He jumped in the race in 2016 as a, quote, independent candidate or something like this, and basically managed to get a good chunk of votes in Utah. And he did that because he was boosted by CNN, MSNBC, and all the mainstream media outlets who were all anti-Trump. And so they thought if they could steal Utah, that one state, just throw him in there. He showed up in a few other states. But if they could take winner takes all electoral votes in Utah, that could swing the balance in Hillary Clinton's favor. That's a regime change CIA operative sponsored by Mitt Romney, injected into a U.S. election. That happened in 2016. And most people be flabbergasted to allow this sort of these games going on, but this is par for the course in America. And we also have what we exposed as well in a previous program. The Democrats, they're leading what's called the Transition Integrity Project. the Transition Integrity Project, and it's a plan to create post-election chaos. And this is a very real thing. This is also up at 21stcenturywire.com. And so this is a shadowy group. They're called the TIP, Transition Integrity Project, a shadowy group of government, military, and media elites who have concocted a plan to spread mayhem and disinformation following the November 3rd presidential election. The strategy takes advantage of presumed delay in determining the winner of the upcoming election due to a deluge in mail-in votes. The interim period is expected to intensify partisan warfare, creating the perfect environment for the dissemination of propaganda and inciting street violence. We covered this on a previous program, and I'm saying it again because this is real stuff. These are real people involved with this. These are big names, some of them, including someone who's meant to be a hero, which is Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, Colin Powell's former chief of staff. He's been kind of an Iraq war whistleblower, retired. I think he teaches at one of the universities around Washington, D.C. And yeah, he's involved with this. So it's pretty shocking stuff. But so there's multiple coup plots, basically. So don't think that something's not going to go down. Don't think that it's not going down right now, because it is. So you got to expect the worst. And when you see Donald Trump being plied with remdesivir, basically experimental drugs that have done workarounds around FDA approval because of COVID. You know, why in the world is the president taking experimental drugs? That's another question. I hope he doesn't take too much of them or survives. But I mean, that's crazy in itself. But Anthony Fauci's happy because he's been promoting remdesivir and saying that hydroxychloroquine's bad for you. And the media have gone along with this whole campaign as well. And of course, Gilead Pharmaceuticals is going to benefit tremendously from the sort of sales of remdesivir and getting this sort of adopted as a global brand to so-called, to treat the virus. Okay. Very, very dodgy, I would say, just as an understatement. So all of that's going on. So it's absolutely crazy. And so in the UK, they renewed the Coronavirus Act this week. And Parliament pulled a fast one. And you'll hear more about this tomorrow on the UK column, 1 p.m. UK time. Brian Garish and Mike Robinson will reveal more details of this, as we did on Friday and Wednesday. And I think we had 300 no-shows. Most of those Labor didn't show up to vote on what is probably the most important piece of legislation that affects the relationship between the government and citizens, maybe in modern history. And you had 300 no-shows. What was going on here? So this is a massive scandal that's afoot. So luckily, there's some real scientists that are getting a little more airtime and getting mentions. One of those is from Oxford University, Professor Sunatra Gupta. She is an epidemiologist, incredibly articulate, and she's been, in my mind, right the whole time. She came out with the right perspective back in May. Of course, we reported on it back then, as did others. And she's now getting recognized by some members of the media, and also even was mentioned by Dr. Scott Atlas, one of the president's heads of the coronavirus task force. He mentioned her as well during a White House press briefing recently. But I've got a clip here from Dr. Gupta, and she really nails, this is the main point. We are not looking at this in the right way, and we're not really listening to the real scientists. Here's one that absolutely can put it in perspective. This is Dr. Gupta from Oxford University. Listen to this segment with Andrew Neil, this short interview. Listen to this.
It's going to be around for some time. And rather than lockdowns or extreme measures, we should learn to live with it. Would that be a sensible response?
I think that's a very sensible response, and that's what should have been made available as an option, or as the most likely course again, right from the outset, because that is what it was likely to happen with a virus of this ilk. So what's most likely to happen and desirable is that it settles down to what we call an endemic equilibrium, such as we enjoy with influenza, with pneumococcal, the bugs that cause pneumonia, and a variety of other pathogens. We live at an endemic equilibrium with them and live lives normally and accept the deaths that they cause, because, you know, that's what society is about. It's about optimizing on this really quite complex landscape of risks and weighing the costs and benefits to arrive at a solution that is the best thing for everybody.
Well, there you go. There you go. There's some adults left in the room. We have a complex set of risks. This is what society is about. This is the job. What government is supposed to be doing is managing a number of risks that are omnipresent in society. And then you decide how you're going to allocate your resources and, you know, how much restrictions you're going to put on the population. You're weighing up all of these different risks. You can't just cherry pick one and make that the center of everybody's life and be blind to everything else. That's the position that we have been advocating since day one. This is also the what Professor Katz, I believe his name is David Katz from Yale University. He's talking about the total harm principle, total harm reduction. That it's not just about dealing with, quote, COVID. He said this back in March. It's about everything. It's about lockdown. It's about other illnesses that people are going to miss out treatment for. It's about homelessness. It's about the economy, all of these things. So what you have is this is a very dangerous time in history, because you have a situation where the government, now this may very well be an intentional agenda. There may be a level of collusion at the highest level, particularly of the leading governments, the United States, the UK, and let's say some of the Germany and France, let's just say. Possibly China to some degree, because they're so ensconced in the World Health Organization. But there could be a level of collusion to drive an agenda that's very similar to, that's very much in line, streamlined with the World Economic Forum's vision of a great reset, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, but at the very least, you have a situation where government officials, where media, where medical officials, supposedly educated, learned medical professionals, they literally can't see the woods from the trees. So everybody's focused on one tree, which is COVID. And they're literally blind to the rest of the forest. That's about as simple of a way as you could probably put it to get the basic idea. But we gave you the basic idea months ago on this show, which we said there's the difference between a virologist and an epidemiologist. The epidemiologist can see the 30,000-foot view. The virologist is down on the granular view. So which one of those two is going to have a greater perspective on all of the factors involved, which is really where government should be. They should be at the 30,000-foot view as much as anything, more so, in fact, than the granular view. And so the media is focused down on one tree, on one grain of sand, amongst many situations and risks that are present in society and the world. And policy is all geared around one single tree and has ignored the forest. The forest could rot, the forest could fall down, the trees could all die, but they put an iron fence around one tree, which is COVID. That's probably the easiest metaphor I could probably give you. It's about the oldest, fable ever, idiom ever. Can't see the woods from the trees. I mean, it doesn't get any more basic than that. So if we've fallen that far from common sense as a civilization, as a society, boy, are we in trouble. Boy, are we in trouble. I mean, we've really fallen off the wagon, haven't we? So anyway, down in Australia, we have a situation. So Chairman Dan, we'll call him Dan Andrews, MP. He's the premier of the state of Victoria. The biggest city there is Melbourne, and this is one of the harshest lockdowns in the world. And so he's been going for it, and they're coming into summer now. They have opposite seasons, and of course, in the Northern Hemisphere. So things are getting hot down there, and the people are really losing their patience, a lot of them. Half the population is very happy because they're getting fat checks. They're getting their $750 a month to stay at home or whatever, job seekers, job keepers. So the government's paying off the left wing of the political part of society to be happy to stay home and watch Netflix and get paid for not working. So obviously there's a great appeal there for certain people. And so they're struggling a little bit to manage the narrative now. People are really defying the government more and more, and they will do as we get into summer. So the government's a bit desperate now. They either got to declare victory and wrap this thing up in 2 weeks, or they got to sort of sleepwalk and go through this zombie lockdown through the summer with, where people can clearly see there's no risk. Okay, so here, listen to this clip. This is from an Australian broadcaster, which just came, I think, a couple of days ago. This is the situation with Chairman Dan from the breakaway People's Republic of Victoria, the breakaway state, formerly Australia. I jest, but listen to this clip. This is incredible.
The Premier has revealed he called the Police Commissioner directly, demanding a crackdown on beachgoers breaking rules. They responded with a show of force today, making sure Melburnians enjoying the sun didn't put lives at risk.
At beaches across the city today, police on patrol on foot and horseback looking for COVID breaches. A huge number of sun seekers at parks right across Melbourne, largely doing the right thing. Different to the confronting scenes at sunset at St Kilda last night. Dozens danced close together on the foreshore, many without masks.
I can tell you, I've got 3 young people in my household, and they were furious. Just furious when they saw those scenes.
It's a bit of an insult to everyone who's done it tough for months and months and months across the state.
The Premier says it wasn't just young people, and most are obeying the law.
Those scenes were very disappointing. It's made a lot of people very angry. It's just not smart, and it's not fair, and it's not lawful.
Fines were handed out, but police wouldn't say how many.
I've spoken with the Chief Commissioner, and Victoria Police are out there today, and they will be out there throughout the weekend to make sure that people are doing the right thing.
Victoria recorded 3 more deaths in their 80s and 90s and linked to aged care, and 8 new cases. Our 2-week rolling average now down to 12. And it's been revealed the cluster at Chadstone, centred around a butcher, has spread from staff to customers. Less than a month ago, Victoria had 1,781 active cases. Today, just 241. Relief now so close for Victoria as other countries face the frightening reality of their second wave.
Europe will be wearing masks for the foreseeable future. Maybe a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years. We can move to a point where we don't have to wear masks. We're not there yet, but we're very close.
We've got to defeat this second wave, and the only way to do that is to keep following the rules for just a few more weeks.
Paul Dowsley, 7 News.
Oh, well, so that was Chairman Dan at the end. He said, we can do this. We just need a few more weeks. He totally gave the game away. So he's on his schedule. So he's got to declare victory in a couple of weeks, and they probably have some big PR campaign planned, Victory Day, VE Day, or VD Day, or whatever, VC Day, Victory Over Corona. And they'll declare zero COVID or something like this. I mean, listen to that report. Oh, they've just had deaths in their 80s and 90s. I mean, you got to be kidding me. So the COVID deaths are, they're older than the average lifespan of an average Australian. In the old days, we used to call that dying of natural causes. But for some reason, dying of natural causes has been rebranded into COVID deaths. So this is a complete distortion, a total manipulation. And the media are completely at it. The government's at it. And they're trying to promote their case-demic, cases. aged care deaths, and then using collective shame and collective guilt to make people feel guilty if they don't follow the rules or wear masks, that somehow they're killing granny. So they're trying to use elderly as a kind of a human shield. Governments are doing this, by the way. And at the same time, they're enacting policies that are actually putting these same elderly people at higher risk, in fact, by rationing care, by choking the health services, by turning the NHS into a COVID-only health service, by dumping sick patients into nursing homes. Again, the same thing that drove up the numbers back in March and April, they're doing it again. And the media is giving them a free pass. I hope smart people step up and speak out now, because they're going to try the gag again this winter. You can absolutely bet on it. So we ran a poll. This is at the top of our Twitter right now, at 21Wire. We ran a poll. I didn't think anybody would bite on this, but they did. We ran a poll, a survey. Do you believe we are actually in a real, quote, pandemic right now? No caveats. It's a straight yes or no question. The poll just finished an hour or so ago, 24-hour poll. We had more votes and more engagement on this than anything I've ever seen, ever. Okay, we had 9,872 votes. That's not a bad sample. But mind you, it might be a slightly biased sample because of our followers and people who are in our wider Twitter echo chamber, but still, it's a good size sample. I mean, the other side, I hashtagged, or there's plenty of people sharing it, so I mean, other people would have seen it. So yeah, 9,800 votes and 1,200 retweets. And here's the results. Do you believe we are actually in a real pandemic right now? And 15.3% said yes. And 84.7% said no, out of 10,000 people, roughly. 84.5% said no, I don't believe we are actually in a real pandemic now. That's a pretty good sample size. What do you think that is in the general population? 84% on Twitter. I'm going to say it's going to be pretty high. I would say it could be as high as 40 or 45, maybe higher percent within the population. So this is important because you have to believe it's a pandemic in order to buy into all of the different rules and measures that constitute what's called the new normal, i.e. masks, social distancing, accepting lockdowns, believing in a second wave, believing that everyone needs to be vaccinated. These are all contingent on the idea that we are in a pandemic or a crisis or an emergency, and therefore emergency calls for crisis measures and calls for you to give up your rights, to give up your liberties for the collective good. Okay, there's so many holes and problems with this whole narrative. It's a sieve, truth be known. It is a total sieve. It's leaking everywhere. But the problem is it's so wide, and the scattergun approach that the government and media have done, it's very difficult for a lot of people to figure out what's going on. They're literally being blasted with propaganda 24/7. You walk in the supermarket, stay safe during the pandemic, and wear a mask, and it's constant. Never stops. It never stops. So anyway, that poll, that's up on our Twitter feed. You can look at that. That's pretty impressive, actually. That's pretty impressive. Not bad. Good engagement. Really good engagement, in fact. A lot of people were upset at that poll. I got a few sideways comments from some people that did retweets with comments saying, I can't believe this person and their followers, look what they're doing. So, hey, I just put it out there, yes or no question, simple. And boy, what results. Amazing. Absolutely incredible. So where does that leave us? Well, let's talk about, speaking of Australia, so this magazine is out on newsstands at finer bookstores and newsagents in Down Under in Australia and New Zealand. This is New Dawn Magazine, legendary publication that's available in Antipodean waters and channels. And here it is. It's got a yellow cover. There's a link to it on the show page. Now, if you're down under, you can buy this at a local newsagent or bookstore. If you're not down under, you can get it online as a PDF. And it's called The Great Reset Special Issue. And I was very fortunate and honored to be asked to be guest editor on this. And I brought in a few writers whose work I like a lot. And I'll preview some of that. Let me just read here. This is the opening editorial here from myself. And it's called Life in the COVID World. We're now 7 months into this global tumult. With each passing week, it's becoming harder to put into words what is happening. It really feels as if the world and Western civilization in particular is having a collective midlife crisis. Since lockdown began, I've been witnessing this protracted Kafkaesque episode from inside the UK. While I couldn't possibly tell you everything about what's been seen and heard in this time of corona, it does feel a little bit like a living reenactment of the following line out of Pink Floyd's classic song, Time. Plans that either come to naught or half a page of scribbled lines hanging on in quiet desperation is the English way. While the novelty of lockdown has receded, life in a COVID world has all the pretense of normal life, only it's not. It's mixed messaging, the regular policy U-turns, and the farcical government propaganda that's continually drifted out. The only thing is uncertainty. We're told life will return to normal. But to get there, we must embrace the new normal. And that order will arise out of this terrible chaos. In the early 1990s, as a student, I was attending a lecture at the Imperial War Museum in London by a noted international war correspondent, Arthur Kent, who had just returned from the Yugoslavian War and was showing his 35mm documentary film, A View of Bosnia. He said something profound, which has reminded me of something to this day, is etched in my mind, that if we in the West can casually accept such horrors to unfold in foreign lands, quote unquote, then it won't be long until that horror arrives on our doorstep. Now, as a journalist and a broadcaster, I personally witnessed some of those horrors, but also the disorder and uncertainty that pervades war and post-war zones like places such as Syria, Iraq, Lebanon. As insecure as those environments were, the foundational pillars remained unshaken: family, faith, and a healthy respect for traditional culture. Those same pillars once existed in the West, but they've since been eviscerated by 60 years of culture wars. Now, as the list of foreign nations left to pillage and plunder grows thin, Western powers have begun the process of recolonizing their own societies. And they're using the very same propaganda techniques perfected overseas. This is what we're experiencing now. It's called the Great Reset. And it's a global coup d'etat orchestrated by technocrats who view the world through a bland, postmodernist, social science lens. Just as it does in war, this chaos can only happen in an environment where people are conditioned to fear each other. It's the ultimate Orwellian inversion, an attack on humanity waged under the guise of saving humanity. Again, we have to defer to the songwriters and the poets to remind us of the human condition. Funny that Robert Burns would teach us something about this moment in history in a poem written in 1786 called To a Mouse. It's about a farmer who laments digging up a mouse's nest while plowing his own field. But Mousie, thou art, know thy lane. You aren't alone. Improving foresight may be vain. The best laid schemes, O mice and men, gang after glay, lay us not but grief and pain for promised joy. We should save ourselves from the possibility of retrospective anguish, of looking back on this time saying, we should have known. That's the opening editorial in this edition of New Dawn. And there's a great feature in here by a great writer and playwright from America. His name's C.J. Hopkins. And you've probably seen his work is on the consentfactory.org, but also republished quite often at the offguardian.org. Great website, especially during the, quote, pandemic. And C.J. Hopkins has a featured piece called Invasion of the New Normals, which is fantastic. So I'll just read you a few paragraphs from this because it's amazing. C.J. Hopkins writes, "They're here. No, not the pod people from Invasion of the Body Snatchers. We're not being colonized by giant alien fruit. I'm afraid it is a little more serious than that. People's minds are being taken over by a much more destructive and less otherworldly force, a force that transforms them overnight into aggressively paranoid, order-following, propaganda-parroting totalitarians. You know the people I'm talking about. Some of them are probably your friends and family, people you've known for years and who've had always seemed completely rational, but who are now convinced that we need to radically alter the fabric of human society to protect ourselves from a virus that causes mild to moderate flu-like symptoms, or absolutely no symptoms at all, in over 95% of those infected, and over 99.6% survive, which, it goes without saying, is totally insane. I've been calling them the corona totalitarians, but I'm going to call them the new normals from now on, as that more accurately evokes the pathologized totalitarian ideology they are systematically spreading. At this point, I think it's important to do that, because clearly their ideological program has nothing to do with any actual virus or any actual public health threat. As is glaringly obvious to anyone whose mind has not been taken over yet, the apocalyptic coronavirus pandemic was always just a Trojan horse, a means of introducing the new normal, which they've been doing since the very beginning. C.J. Hopkins, I mean, that's just a taste of this piece. Some of you might have read this at the Consent Factory during the summer, but it's just a great printed edition, and there's tremendous writers in here. I mean, it's from America, from down under, from Europe. I mean, they've really put together an incredible issue here. New Dawn magazine. There's a link to it on the show page, and our hats off to the publishers and producers, especially Dave and Jason down under. You've done a tremendous job, and thank you for inviting me to be guest editor for this special edition at this important time in history, and we hope that this publication makes a massive impact right now. Certainly the timing is uncanny. So we're going to break in a minute, but before we do that, there's just a couple more stories that I wanted to throw out. There's some weird stuff going on. The first thing, we'll go back to politics. We'll go back to politics. Now, you remember the Kavanaugh hearings just over a year ago. Justice Kavanaugh was Supreme Court justice nomination. Trump nominated a judge, and they absolutely went crazy. They brought witnesses forward, Stanford professor, I believe Christine Blasey Ford, and these accusations and so forth. They dragged this guy really through the ringer. And the call there was from the media and the Democrats, believe all women, that you must believe the accusers. And of course, these are serious charges and should be taken seriously. But in this case with Kavanaugh, it was 30 or plus years after the fact this person appeared. to make these accusations. Now we have a former Biden staffer who has been mothballed by the media. Her name is Tara Reid. And we'll call this should be a national holiday. This week in October is Billy Bush week. Billy Bush weekend, let's call it. Because at this point in 2016 is when the Billy Bush Access Hollywood tape was released, I think, right around here. And that was it killed Trump in the polls. I mean, he was making a surge and he just got knocked back because his Access Hollywood tape, this off the cuff, in the bus chat with Billy Bush and Trump from 2005, I think, it got leaked. And it was devastating at the time for the Trump campaign. So now the Tara Reid story has appeared. No U.S. media outlet will touch it. It's very serious indeed. But 60 Minutes in Australia just ran it. So listen to this. This is just the trailer from this program. This is former Joe Biden staffer Tara Reid talking to 60 Minutes Australia. Go ahead and roll this.
In the Senate office, here's a good picture of Senator Biden.
He pushed me up against the wall, and then he used his knee to separate my legs.
You all right?
Mm-hmm. She was telling me to go to the police right then, and to keep what I was wearing and on, and to go to the police.
Why did you resist going to the police?
They're there to protect the senators and congressmen. They're not there to protect us.
Did you sexually assault Tara Reid?
No, it is not true.
What made you think, nah, I'm going to tell the full truth?
I decided that people needed to know he's going to the highest office of the land. Well, I know what he's like. I know what his character's like. And he doesn't deserve the presidency based on what happened to me. He's been misogynistic. He's had sexual assault allegations, sexual harassment. He's a blue Trump. He's a blue Trump.
Okay, so that's Tara Reid. I mean, that's pretty serious, heavy stuff there. The question is, how is this not getting any airtime in the United States? That's a thing in itself. What's the media doing? So do we have a partisan media in the U.S.? Well, I think clearly we probably do. And even Fox News may or may not touch this story either. So there seems to be some kind of an armistice between Democrats and Republicans that are not going to touch the story. Maybe there's a backroom deal. Anyway, it appeared on 60 Minutes in Australia, which is a thing in itself. I mean, with the internet, with global digital streaming and things like this, you know, this story will be a global story. It's not going to get the focus, though, in the U.S. I thought that was interesting. That comes right at this weekend when Trump's been mothballed with COVID right after the debates. Billy Bush weekend, basically, we'll call it. So that's an interesting story. Very serious allegations. She's been kind of rubbished in the mainstream media. The Democrats hate her, of course. They think that she's being put up by the Trump administration to make problems for Biden now. But again, Kamala Harris, who's the vice presidential campaign, she said we must, always believe the female accusers and we shouldn't be, not taking their allegations seriously and so forth. That was the call against Kavanaugh. And here we have this case. This is an actual staffer of Biden while he was a senator. So we'll see if this has any legs. Who knows? Who knows what to believe anyway these days? But I thought that was very interesting. It might become a story. This is why we're mentioning it now. It might snowball into something. It might just get buried under the rug. To be honest, I don't know. But then there's this other story, which is actually kind of wacky. But there's a group that Trump, they tried to put Trump on the spot during the debates, saying that, do you disavow the Proud Boys? And you keep hearing this term, the Proud Boys. Who are the Proud Boys? Supposedly, according to CNN, according to MSNBC, the New York Times, the left, basically, the Proud Boys are a white supremacist organization. Okay. Now, personally, I've never been really impressed with the Proud Boys. I don't find them to be a very notable group. They seem to be kind of a media opportunist, kind of loose gaggle of various characters, kind of lower tiered media characters. It's founded by Gavin McInnes, who used to be with Vice. Okay, that's a whole story in itself. He's Canadian, and so Vice, when they moved their operations to New York City, I think in the 90s, Vice Magazine, Vice Media, and he left, I think, before they created Vice News, or right around that time, and Shane Smith started Vice News. So McGinnis comes from the Vice crowd, and he's kind of a hipster type guy. He's got the curly mustache, the beard, and all that. So the Proud Boys, they tried to put Trump on the spot, saying disavow. Sort of the same thing they did with back in 2016. It didn't work fairly well. The Proud Boys are kind of a joke. I mean, to a lot of people, they're a joke. But the media have elevated them. So again, it's this kind of establishment cutout organization. To me, they're kind of like an establishment cutout organization because they keep getting boosted by the establishment, even though they're really nothing. And they get boosted, and they blow their brand up. And the mainstream media have done wonders for them in the short term by blowing them up and giving them such a lofty status. They're not a militia group or anything significant in that respect. They kind of just show up. There's a lot of social media activity, and it's also Gavin McInnes himself. It's a great magnet for media coverage for him too. And this is kind of a hangover from the alt-right sort of scare thing, the phenomenon of the 2016 elections. The 2016 elections were like the OJ trial for social media. Do you remember the OJ Simpson trial in the early 90s? And all of the people you see in mainstream media all made their careers out of the OJ trial. There's a list as long as my arm. From the lawyers, all the various celebrity judges, Greta Van Susteren, half the main pundits on mainstream cable news came out of the OJ trial. I mean, everybody cashed in on that. So the 2016 election, you got all these sort of like pundits that are kind of elevated way above their station. They don't really have any beliefs, or they're just famous for being famous. You know what I mean? So you have the Cernoviches of the world. You have Gavin McInnes, Jack Posobiec, and all these kind of social media personalities who are kind of associated with being in the Trump camp, or there's not much to say. They don't say much other than I'm against the left. Ben Shapiro, there's another one. I mean, all these people were kind of born and they made their sort of careers out of the 2016 election. But they just exist to be, quote, against the left, which isn't, to me, very interesting at all. But that's what they do. They're personalities. And so what happened? The Proud Boys, I hate to say this, and I'm going to have to break it to you. I'm sorry, guys, but you know the old saying that the left can't mem? Well, unfortunately for the Proud Boys, the left learned to mem, and that hashtag has been co-opted, Proud Boys, by guess who? The LGBT community. I cannot underscore how devastating this is for Gavin and the Proud Boys. No, I don't really care one way or the other, but it's pretty bad. So they've been co-opted. Now, if you look at hashtag Proud Boys, this is this sort of supposedly a macho conservative type group movement, which really wasn't much of anything in terms of significance, not politically anyway. But anyway, they've just been wiped out. They've been Pepe'd by the left, if you can believe that. The left have Pepe'd the Proud Boys. I hate to say it, guys, but it's pretty bad. You can't recover from this. Like disco, just like disco, it's now a damaged brand, unfortunately. So, unfortunately, it couldn't have happened to a better person, old Gavin McInnes. Sorry about that, but that's the end of that. So, unfortunately, we're probably not going to be seeing much of the Proud Boys anymore after this. It's really bad. So, it's funny how Twitter works. So, that's where we're at in terms of the election. Things are going to get really weird in the next couple of weeks. I don't know where this Trump drama is going to go with the whole COVID thing, and if Biden gets COVID, and there's going to be all sorts of scare stories now. It just fed right into the media's paranoia of everything. So it's the worst possible So I don't know. Hopefully, like I said, ideally we want to have two healthy candidates running for president. People go to the polls, they vote, we call a winner on the 3rd or the morning of the 4th. That's what we'd like to happen. But guess what? And I'm sorry to say this, that's not going to happen. So buckle up, buckle your seatbelts. It's going to get really, really rough. I'm telling you, it's going to get really rough in the United States. This is not going to be a regular election. And I'm sad to say it's not going to be over on November 4th, unfortunately. So if you're Republican or you're on the right, or if you're a Democrat and you're on the left, you're going to have to be ready to fight for your position on this. I'm sorry to say, the decks have been stacked. The plots are in motion. It's going to happen, and there's going to be chaos. I almost think it's completely unavoidable, barring some miracle or some come to Jesus moment where they stand down the rioters in Portland and Oakland and LA and New York and Atlanta and Charlottesville and wherever else, Washington, D.C., whatever. Barring some miracle, Chicago, barring some miracle, it's going to be really, really, really messy. I just see this coming, and it's not looking good. Inject COVID into it, it's going to be even worse. It's going to be even worse. So we'll see. We'll see, ladies and gentlemen. Let's take a short break, and we'll connect our next guest, Basil Valentine, on the other side, and we will have the first sermon of the Church of the New Normal in our overtime segment. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We'll be back after this short break.
If there's one thing I've learned about experts, they're experts on fuck all. If there's a rule, you can bend it. If there's a law, it can be broken. And from now on, I'm breaking all the rules. Because desperate men do desperate deeds.
Gathered here today in the hope of freedom and dignity. Now, howsoever, we offer this prayer, and the prayer is, how long will this bullshit go on? How long? How long? How long will this bullshit go on? That is the eternal question men have always asked. How long? When man first got here, he said, how long will these animals kick me in the ass? How long before I discover fire and stop freezing to death? We always here in our church of understanding and unity have tried to figure out how long. Now it says in the Bible, we will know how long when an angel come up out the sea. He will have 7 heads and a face like a serpent and a body like a lion. I don't know about you, but I don't want to see no motherfucker look like that. If I see him come up out the water, I'm going to shoot him in the ass.
Ladies and gentlemen, yes, thank you. We are gathered here today for the first sermon of the First Universal Church of the New Normal and the Sacred Tabernacle of the Holy Corona. And this is the year of the new normal, the eternal 2019, the year of eternity, this year. And we shall be guided through the storm, guided by the CDC, and thou shalt not venture out into the street without a face covering. And we ask that you trust in Fauci and have faith with men in white coats and badges with pens and calculators in their front pocket. But most of all, stay safe. Control the virus. Don't leave the house. Again, trust in Fauci. And as always, let us be guided by the science. Always guided by the science. And if we can, I'd like to hear a few words from our deacon, Brother Basil Valentine. Deacon Basil, will you be kind enough to guide us in prayer through the new normal as we go blindly into the day and night?
Patrick.
Hello, Basil. Brother Basil.
Yeah. I'm not an adherent of this new religion of COVIDianity.
Heretic.
Not at all. I resign all previous commissions. But it is interesting the way the unseen virus and collective reaction to it has acquired some of the properties of organized religion. We have the various articles of faith. You know, people believe in the virus. They can't see it any more than they can see God. Although, of course, I'm reminded of what Swami Vivekananda said when asked if he had ever seen God. He replied, "I've only seen God, and so have you." But nobody's ever seen the virus, I suppose, other than those trying to produce a vaccine who've been staring at it under a microscope. Perhaps they've seen something that the rest of us haven't seen, Patrick.
Yes, the corona is it's everywhere, it's pervasive, it's indestructible. Right. It has achieved near godlike status, don't you think?
Exactly. Yes. And of course, like a religion, as I say, it has its articles of faith, it has its symbols, and it has its sacraments. The most important symbol at the moment is the wearing of a mask, a symbol that you are a true believer, just as people wore crosses for 2,000 years. And we are about to have delivered the most important sacrament, which is the administering of the vaccine. The heretics will be defined and can then be punished in the way that heretics have been throughout the ages. Refusing the sacrament of the vaccine is tantamount to denying Christ, to refusing communion. And anybody falling into that trap will no doubt be labeled a heretic, just as non-believers were by the medieval church. What do you think, Patrick?
So you're saying that in the new church of the new normal, to show one's virtue, one must wear a mask, one must socially distance,
and one must. Yeah, yes. The mask is the outward symbol that you are a true believer.
Okay.
Like wearing a cross, you know. You see the cross around somebody's neck, you're a Christian. You know what I mean? See somebody wearing a mask, you believe in the virus and in its power.
Yes.
And for you to unwittingly infect others.
Yes. And now,
so... Of course, it may be said that, oh no, the mask actually is of tremendous practical benefit. But then to true believers, wearing a cross was of tremendous practical benefit because it warded away evil. So,
yes,
the parallel is clear, you know.
But the irony of that, Basil, is that the cross probably did does ward away fear more effectively than the mask wards away the virus.
Well, certainly if you watch Hammer horror films from the 1970s, yes, those wonderful ones.
It does. It's actually probably more meaningful and effective than the mask, I think.
Yeah.
So tell me this. There's three types of people that we've noticed.
Wait a sec, mate. There's more.
Okay.
The indication that you are a true believer is your urge to remain 6 feet apart from people or maintaining your so-called social distance. So just as a Christian would make the sign of the cross, some football players still do before they run on the pitch, things like that. From the forehead down to the solar plexus and then across left and right breast, making the sign of the cross. So the true believers of COVIDianity will take a step or two back from you if they feel that you're getting too close in a shop or on a pavement. Another indication that they hold the faith. Right?
Yes.
Likewise, they would never allow themselves to be in a place where there are 6 people or more, So all these things, the washing of the hands with the antibacterial agent on entering any commercial premises is more than reminiscent of dousing oneself with holy water on entering a church.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it has become, as you say, with the decline of Christianity over the last 50 years in particular, people are very keen to believe in something. They believe in celebrity. A lot of people sort of worship celebrities. They worship themselves. They worship, of course, in all sorts of New Age religions as well. But here is something which is in many ways more reminiscent of the medieval church than any New Age religion because it's based on fear. COVIDianity is based on fear solely. I am afraid, therefore, I respect the new invisible demigod absolutely. And I display all the articles of faith, as I've mentioned. And what's more, I can't wait to take the Holy Sacrament when it becomes available, the vaccine. That's the sacrament. Test is the test is a sort of pre-sacrament. Think of it like baptism. John the Baptist came before Christ. If you're mad keen to have a test and act upon the results, that's a sort of a warm-up act to the main event, which of course is going to be the vaccine itself. So
you're calling it COVIDianity.
COVIDianity.
Or the branch Covidian. If you're that way inclined. So you're talking about the fetishization of these various articles of faith, right?
Well,
the mask, the vaccine, all of that, right?
People want to believe in something, and here they're being given something they can believe in, which modifies their behavior, their whole way of thinking. I mean, it strikes me that the dystopia is sort of, on unseen psychological levels, is sort of doubling by the week. I mean, the mask wearing, for example, was originally only supposed to be in order that we could get back to normal quickly. Wear a mask for a little while, then we'll be able to eradicate the virus and all get back to normal quickly. Now it's turning into the mask wearing is the new normal. It isn't a temporary thing at all. And as for the vaccine, well, Metro are reporting this week that every adult in the UK, there's no suggestion of what recusants or refuseniks might be allowed to do. Every adult in the UK could be vaccinated by Easter under a 3-month mass rollout plan. This is the Oxford University project. And rules are being drawn up to allow, this is particularly interesting, a much wider group of healthcare staff to give the jabs. So this will include physiotherapists, midwives, and other health professionals not currently qualified to administer injections indirectly into the bloodstream. This wider number of people will be empowered to administer the vaccine, so that up to 600,000 shots a day can be dished out. And 2 doses, this is the proposal, would be given to each of of Britain's 53 million adults within 6 months. So you'd get a shot, and then you'd get another shot. And this would require 600,000 jabs, a day. If approved, this is the NHS are gearing up for it. I've seen last week an advert for an NHS manager in which specified that you would be a key component, a key element of your work would be that you would be administering the mass rollout of the vaccination program. So the NHS are undoubtedly gearing up for it. And ministers are planning to change the law to allow this program to begin before the end of the year. If UK regulators, doesn't quite say who they are, believe it to be safe, not that it's been demonstrated to be safe, simply that they believe it to be safe is enough, even if it's not yet approved by the European Medicines Agency.
That's an interesting concept. Believe it to be safe. That's where I see the whole conversation centered around, is it safe? Is it effective? Yeah, those are important. But the third question, which no one's asking, is it necessary? If you consider where does the coronavirus sit in terms of, seasonal respiratory viral threats? Is it necessary that every man, woman, and child be vaccinated for the coronavirus? Even if it was proven to be safe and effective, is it necessary? Why would you want to require everyone to be vaccinated for something that has a 99.997 survival rate, and most people have no symptoms at all, and it just passes through your system as nothing? That's the question. Is it necessary? What do you think about that?
Well, it may be necessary for reasons other than the ones that are being presented to us. I mean, at the moment, the reason why it's being presented as necessary seems to be less to do with saving lives and more to do with getting, in inverted commas, back to normal, right? That would, nobody's sort of saying that. Well, they actually said that they hope that this means there are 50% less infections. That is apparently the benchmark for success. If there are 50% less infections as a result of the vaccination.
So they're basing the concept of an infection on a PCR positive test, which you can't say a PCR positive test equals a case or an infection, because all it's doing is detecting RNA viral fragments in your system that could be months old, in fact. And this is what the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine in Oxford in the UK has said ad nauseum. It doesn't seem to be that the health ministry or the government are listening to that, though. Even the inventor of the PCR test warned against using it as a diagnostic tool, Kerry Mullis. So,
I think the suggestion is that by infection they sort of mean cases, really. Number of people that fall ill falls by 50%.
But do they?
Well,
I think they're conflating cases with positive PCR test, infections with positive PCR. That's the danger here. That's the danger. They're driving a case-demic, not a pandemic.
Another story being run by the BBC on the same subject. doctors in the West Midlands have been told to plan for mass vaccination scheme as early as November. A leaked document identifies 2 vaccines expected to be available this year. Again, the assumption is that in this article is that the entire population is going to be vaccinated. Immunising the entire population could take 10 months and will start with the most vulnerable in care homes. It's due to start with most care home occupants and staff, then the over 65s, then the over 50s, and then everybody else. According to the document, you'll like this, Patrick, the 2 vaccines are called Ambush and Triumph.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, my God. They don't stop, do they?
Triumph is developed by Oxford University and AstraZeneca and can be stored at room temperature. The other one, Ambush, has to be stored at minus 70 degrees Celsius. So,
Ambush.
Yeah.
That's pretty pleasant. Pretty pleasant name for a vaccine, Ambush. So the point is to get us back to normal. Let's talk about normal for a second. Let's talk about normal. Sweden's normal. Sweden has a lower infection rate than the UK, lower deaths than the US and UK, and per capita. Their schools never closed. Their education was never disrupted. There was no lockdowns, just some basic minimal social distancing regs, okay? There's no 100 billion pound moonshot to get everybody tested. No masks, so totally optional in Sweden. Millions of jobs were saved, and their children can basically continue their education and lives as normal. The World Health Organization just announced the infection fatality rate for COVID being 0.13%. Now compare this with the seasonal flu, which is 0.10%. And that's the World Health Organization. So the numbers are getting more accurate now. They have more data. But our governments don't seem to be reacting. So in the population fatality rate, if you're in Sweden, you get COVID, 0.06% chance that, you could die from COVID. Okay. Herd immunity has been achieved with between 10 and 20% seroprevalence, which means antibody prevalence within the population. So it didn't need 70 or 80% seroprevalence. They did it with 10 or 20 because the rest of it is T cell, natural adaptive immunity. So there's no need for a vaccine in Sweden. If people want it, it's optional. The median age of death in Europe is over 80 years old for COVID. Over 80. That's higher than the average lifespan in Europe. And there's no need for a mandatory vaccine. And so we can easily, as Dr. Gupta said in the first segment, we can easily adapt to living with, even if it's an endemic virus. So that's normal. So what are they talking about, Basil? I don't get it.
No, well, nor do I. It's but then again, this is as we've said, we're talking about a new religion, and people have been so cowed that I think they'll do anything to get back to. Well, I think we should stop using the term normal, but to pre-March social, cultural, and economic life. Let's put it that way. But CNN this week, Nick Payton Walsh.
Oh, not him.
Yeah. And I quote, as 2020 slides into and probably infects 2021, try to take heart in one discomforting fact. Things are most likely never going, quotes, back to normal.
Let me stop. Hold on. Pause. Nick Payton Walsh is the biggest war propagandist on CNN's payroll. Full stop. He is promoted and sold every single war, proxy and otherwise, while he's been at CNN. I just want to throw that out there, Basil.
Well, yeah. Warmongers are also those keenest on vaccines. Just a coincidence. Nothing to worry about.
So you go ahead.
Had you noticed that yourself?
I have actually. I'm seeing a lot of people falling in the same column on a lot of these issues, and I find it highly disturbing. I'm wondering if there's more to it. Is it ideological? What is it? Article of faith?
Well,
what is it?
It's to do with something called the New World Order. But of course, even the very use of that term will brand you a conspiracy theorist. And I think it's that, that anybody that doesn't want the vaccine, the heretic, the new term for heretic is conspiracy theorist, isn't it?
Yeah.
Burn the heretics, shun the conspiracy theorists.
Anti-vaxxers.
That's right.
So back to the religious argument. So we see three categories of people. Tell me if you're with me on this. We see those who do not believe in the lie, but play the game out of fear of losing their jobs, for instance, their businesses. I'm talking about teachers, talking about principals, taxi drivers, business owners, small business owners. Then we have those who believe, let's say 50%, half and half. And so they wear the mask and they do so not to annoy others or not, to let others feel safe, especially their elders. Okay. Yeah. That's a pretty common position, and I sympathize with that. Then we've got a third group. Okay. These are people who are strong believers in the COVIDianity. And they give a hard time to whoever is not wearing a mask, calling them irresponsible, shaming them, and threatening to shop them to the clerics or the authorities or the COVID marshals or whoever. So,
yes, that's right. Inquisition.
Yes.
The new Inquisition.
Yes. So those three, what do you think? Are those the three main categories?
Pretty much. Yeah. You've got it there. I mean, there are agnostics. They will be swept up with the true believers. You know what I mean? Oh, well, the virus won't do me any harm, so I'll take it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Very trusting.
So here's a religious statement. I want you to come. I'll tell you who said this. I'll read it, and you guess on who you think might have said this. Okay. So I quote. Okay, the world's population is now 6.7 billion, roughly double what it was when I was born. If I live to be in my mid-80s, then it will have trebled in my lifetime. I simply cannot understand why no one discusses this impending calamity and why no world statesmen have the guts to treat the issue with the seriousness it deserves. We seem to have given up on population control. Said who, Basil Valentine?
Bill Gates, Tony Blair?
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? Actually, that was from October 2007, and that was none other than the writer for the Daily Telegraph, Boris Johnson.
Right.
Now that's kind of interesting, isn't it?
I wasn't expecting that, I must admit.
I wasn't either. I thought that was lifted off of Gates. But that's Bojo. That's Bojo. So, yeah,
go on.
Go ahead. Well,
I was just going to say that I've started to see one or two little, pieces saying that the combination of climate change and COVID are going to require a substantial reduction in population.
Yeah, I've heard that. Seen all that.
That started to sort of come out on the Twitterati, as it were,
Mm-hmm. So this is
COVID-19 is a dress rehearsal for climate change. So says Alan Carroll in the Press Herald. You know what I mean? That people are sort of linking the two as these two major challenges that the world faces over the next 20 years, and that in order to combat them, we're going to have to have a much smaller population. I mean, people are also saying that the next range of lockdown measures could include things like not being permitted to travel more than 5 miles from your home. Because you see, once you've got people as true believers, once they've signed up to the Articles of Faith, as we mentioned, it's then possible for the clerics and the theologians of the new church to start issuing new edicts. For example, in medieval times, the Catholic Church decided to introduce the concept of papal infallibility, whereby anything the Pope said was automatically 100% correct and he could never say anything wrong. And all the various papal bulls and edicts since then have had that stamp of approval. But the same applies to the new religion of COVIDianity. Once people believe that in this invisible deadly threat, all pervasive, that is now controlling our lives, then it's possible for those in authority in the church to impose new rules at will. For example, you can't travel more than 5 or 6 miles from your home. That, of course, then makes it very difficult to live in rural areas. And so we would then see people herded into cities, the new designated human habitation zones, as per Agenda 2030. Now, I hope I'm not sounding like a paranoid conspiracy theorist, Patrick.
Well, now that you're on the subject of the papal edicts, there are those who say that the church, the medieval church, was well aware that the earth was not flat, but enforced the flat earth doctrine in order to keep other people from competing with their own exploration efforts that were already underway to map and colonize North and South America. But it's the power of the papal edict that creates the enforcement of, the law of the land or the law of the world, as it were. So that was back in those days. So the direction of travel we're heading here, Greta Thunberg, listen to this quote. She says, this is Greta last year. She says, "I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. I want you to act. I want you to act like you would in a crisis. I want you to act like your house is on fire, because it is," says Greta Thunberg, which I think she's a kind of the, Joan of Arc type figure of this, the kind of revolutionary vanguard of the Church of COVIDianity.
Yes, I know what you mean. She's certainly stoking it up there, isn't she? She, of course, was making all those noises before we had the great revelation of COVID, but nevertheless, still advocating fear, isn't she? I mean, I think it's unbelievable, really, that she's allowed to sort of get away with saying that sort of thing. I mean, it's all very well being very concerned about climate change. If you feel that man-made climate change is the most important issue facing the planet, okay, fair enough. That's a legitimate position, and we should endeavour to take steps to mollify, whatever can be done. I'm personally sceptical about the extent to which humanity's actions affect the climate. I think it's got a lot to do with the sun, and more people are now starting to notice changes in the sun's activity. But simply saying that people should live in fear, is terribly negative. Life is to be enjoyed. We should not be living in fear. We should be living in joy and living in love and living in harmonic resonance with nature and with spirit and with our souls, not living in fear. So, as a prophet of COVIDianity, I'm afraid Greta sort of fits the bill. I don't know. I haven't seen any of her comments on the crisis itself, but I would think she sort of welcomes it if it's stoking up the fear. And of course, the decrease in economic activity is more than she could have prayed for. The Western economies, air travel's absolutely decimated. Thousands of airline workers were furloughed and laid off last week in the States and all around the world. This sort of sudden urgency to build more runways everywhere is going to be a thing of the past. And the way that the heretics are going to be punished, it looks like, Patrick, anyway, for refusing to take the holy sacrament of the vaccine, is that you will not have your go anywhere COVID passport. So unless you've had the vaccine and can prove that you're a true believer, you'll be staying at home.
Yes. Well, funny enough, Greta has compared the COVID-19 response. She's basically saying this is proof that we can suddenly act with necessary force for climate change. So she's saying that because we did it for COVID, we can do the same for climate change. So what do you think about this theory? So man is hardwired for, it's in our DNA to have faith, to have religion. And like you said earlier in the segment, that the kind of, Christianity's kind of been sucked out, really, or major religions have been kind of sucked out and through various methods out of society, out of life, out of citizenship and whatnot, people's lives. So there's a big void and a gap there, and so this has just come in to fill that void. This is kind of like a replacement religion. Well, we're talking about the climate. You could say climate change is one, but I think the COVIDianity is more, like you said, it has more of the actual real attributes of a medieval style kind of religion. And it's got the direct fear factor. It's not fear of what might happen in 200 years, but it's fear now. So what do you think about this as a replacement religion? What do you think?
Well, as I say, people want to believe in something, don't they? So, and they have it rammed down their throats. Let's not forget the extent to which Christianity was all pervasive in medieval times, right the way up to including Victorian times in the West. There wasn't anything else, and in terms of the propaganda that's been shoved down people's throats with respect to COVIDianity, again, it's sort of like, how can you not believe in it? It's so obvious. Why would we be doing all these things to society if it was exaggerated? So it seems to be having the same sort of mental effect on people in terms of, I hesitate to use the term, but it's most appropriate, really. It's a form of trauma-based mind control. The trauma is the fear of this deadly disease, which could lie any of us low at any moment. And the trauma is also the damage done to society. And that makes it more easy to control the way people think. I mean, we're continuing to see society at large sort of absolutely cleaved in two on lines that are very difficult to establish, really, as to what characteristics, previously exhibited characteristics, make someone a true believer, and what characteristics would make somebody a skeptic, but it's or a heretic. But it's the battle lines are becoming increasingly militant, put it that way, the true believers are increasingly intolerant of the heretics, who they see as endangering everyone, their lack of faith.
Yes. That's kind of how it's rolling. That's what's rolling out right now. I mean, it's hard to argue with. Gosh, if you told me that it would be heading in this general direction of travel, 10 months ago or whatever, I would say you're crazy. There's absolutely no way.
That's right. I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember in 6 months ago on the program, you were skeptical, and I was saying, no, this is for real. It's just a 3 weeks lockdown, then everything will be back to normal. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's an unwelcome necessity, but you have to sort of go along with it. And then it became clear quite quickly that things were not going to go back to normal very, very quickly. And I remember saying that, a key component of the outcome of this was going to be the extent to which any vaccine was made compulsory. And it all went very quiet on the vaccine front for a long time. And now, just in the last week or two, although Bill Gates has been pushing it for months, it's come into the mainstream on both sides of the Atlantic, and the assumption is that everybody will be getting vaccinated. I mean, that's the interesting thing about what both Metro and the BBC report last week was saying, is that the assumption is that everybody gets it. So that then makes the heretics very much the other. What do you mean you don't? What do you mean you don't want it? What do you mean? You can't. That's not an acceptable position. That's untenable. Everybody's getting it.
Exactly.
As Bill Gates himself sort of, said slightly under his breath in one interview earlier this summer, you don't get a choice. That's what he said. It's sort of slightly sotto voce. He sort of mumbles it at the end of another answer, but it's nevertheless very clear. You don't get a choice. And I'm curious to know the extent to which behind the scenes, Gates has been talking to Fauci or to the British government, to policymakers, not just in the World Health Organization, into which he funnels millions of dollars, of course, but also into policymakers.
Oh, he's been photographed with, Boris Johnson, Nicola Sturgeon, Mac Hancock, Emmanuel Macron, and the list goes on and on. So yeah, he's definitely in close contact. But in terms of the Branch Covidian hierarchy, where would Bill Gates sit if this is a type of a religion, a new church? What position does Bill Gates occupy? What type of a actor is he in that?
I think he's probably the Pope.
Really?
Oh yeah. I mean, no one has invested as much time or money in or belief in this holy sacrament of the vaccine, have they? He's been the number one cheerleader. Yeah. Someone like Fauci is merely an archbishop.
Yes, that's right. Archbishop Fauci. I like the ring of that. And he's Italian too, so it sort of works.
There you go.
That's it. So if they do roll this thing out in the UK, like you said, then Boris Johnson, we could give him a nickname, which is Jabber the Hutt. How about that? Jabber the Hutt.
Very good.
600,000 jabs a day.
More than sort of comic nicknames to stop it. It'll be interesting to see the extent to which the libertarian wing of the Conservative Party, which has had its reservations about some of these harsher lockdown measures, is willing to, row in with the idea of compulsory vaccinations or penalties for those who refuse to be vaccinated. that'll be interesting to see. Will there be, because it's one thing the likes of sort of David Icke, Piers Corbyn making speeches in Trafalgar Square. They have their followers, but generally can be dismissed by government, by the authorities as, to use a time-honoured phrase, the lunatic fringe. They're not to be taken seriously. We all know that Mike believes in lizards, and Piers Corbyn's got some very strange ideas as well, so we don't have to take them seriously, nor do we have to take seriously anybody who adheres closely to anything they say. So, therefore, we can legitimately impose, harsh punishments for anybody who refuses the vaccine. But if the sort of libertarian wing of the Conservative Party get organised, then they may sort of turn around and say, okay, yeah, well, the vaccine's all very well, but you can't force people to have it or penalise them if they don't. I'm afraid to say I think we can assume that the Labour Party will row in with the most authoritarian tendencies of the government and share the belief in scientism, because this hastily developed vaccine, as I say, they hope it's going to reduce infections by 50%. But as you said, Patrick, that's not going to be very easily provable. And I, for one, am extremely sceptical about the state of the science, whether or not they are indeed able to isolate this particular strain and then develop something which, injected into your bloodstream, will do you no harm, but will protect you against possible infection at some unknown point in the future. People who aren't scientists have a touching faith in the extent of modern medicine, as it were, particularly on the sort of pharmacological front. Oh, they know everything these days. This is the 21st century after all, when, quite simply they don't, But again, that's heresy. Saying that is heresy, Patrick. That's, failure to believe in the science behind COVID-19 is another heretical tenet.
That's right, because we're guided by this. The church is guided by the science. It's guided by the science, and you can't question that. And then the clerics can say, if you voice an opinion or you have a certain interpretation of the dogma of the Branch Covidian doctrine, the clerics will come and they will chastise you for, who are you? What are your qualifications? Are you a doctor? Are you, do you have a PhD? Are you a public health official? Who are you to speak against the holy tenets of the Covidianity doctrine? And right. You'll be chastised on the spot. You might have to wear a hair shirt for a week.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Meanwhile, cinemas up and down the country closing. Cineworld announced this week they were closing all their cinemas with a loss of hundreds of jobs.
That's incredible.
The entertainment industry is in absolute meltdown. I know of one major festival, due to run summer 2021, who have already cancelled. And I don't think it'll be long before we hear that there will be no Glastonbury in 2021.
I think you're right.
Because you can't, first of all, you can't run a festival on sort of so-called social distancing lines. It's a complete and utter non-starter. You can't start spending tens of thousands of pounds on infrastructure, on paying deposits for artists, on booking all kinds of acts and attractions and the site and everything else, unless you know you're going to be able to run. Otherwise it's chucking money down the drain, as I have found to my personal cost in the dim, distant past. So I am afraid I think we'll start seeing the major outside events for 2021 cancelled one by one in the coming months.
So in terms of organization, in your knowledge of that sector, if you're planning something like big in let's say June of, or July, let's say July of 2021, at this time right now, we're in October of 2020, what needs to have happened by now, basically, if you're to lock down and get that event properly organized? What would you have to have paid for or confirmed by this point in the year?
Well, the first thing would be the site. No site, no event. So you'd have to have the site booked. Depending on what that site is, you'd have to pay a deposit before very long. And then you'd need the major pieces of infrastructure booked, the stages, the fencing, the water pipes. And of course, you'd need a public entertainment's license as well from the local authority. And applying for that license is quite a costly and extremely difficult bureaucratic process. So you'd want to start getting these basic building blocks nailed down before Christmas, so that after Christmas you can start adding the bells and whistles and booking your acts and entertainment and getting the tickets on sale and all the rest of it. So depending on the size of event, you're going to need the site, you're going to need your license, and you're going to need the major infrastructure this side of Christmas, all of which costs money. Plus, of course, any staff that you're employing to do all these things. So, there's a few £1,000s to be spent this side of Christmas, and no guarantee of anything.
So you need assurances that it's not going to be shut down because of a quote spike in cases in that town or a change in government policy at the last minute, some panic measure. You can't invest and you can't plan for anything, really. No conference, no event, no music festival, no conference, concerts, any of that. You couldn't do it unless you had some assurances that things are going to be normal, basically.
Well, where we are at the moment is that you can only go to a pub if you're prepared to give over your personal details and sit in a prearranged bubble. And of course, you're not allowed to get up and dance. So from where we are now to thousands of people milling about, mask-free, squashed into mosh pits and, saunas, bars, and all the other stuff that you get at outdoor events, is a long, long way,
Yeah.
Long, long way.
Wow, that's something else, isn't it? Well. So there's a lot more at stake than what people think and what people are willing to let on to. So, but look, we're gonna wrap it up, and Before we wrap it up, any last words, Brother Basil?
Well, we'd like to end on a positive note or two. The first one I wanted to add is that dear old Enable, at the age of 6, was unable to regain her crown in the Qatar Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe at Longchamp this afternoon. She finished 6th, I think. Couldn't quicken on the rain soften going. The race went to last year's 3rd Sotsas, trained by the master Jean-Claude Rouget, a son of Wotton Bassett, an unfashionably bred horse, well, semi-unfashionably, but who's doing great things at stud, and has, as a result, been acquired by the Coolmore operation. For yours truly, it was what I can only describe as another attritional weekend's gambling. But there we are. We'll have a jackpot one day soon. And the last thing I want to say is that for all the challenges of the current situation, nothing is more important at the moment than retaining the vision of a COVID-free world and not not a new world order world, but a happy, healthy, creative world where we are allowed, I say allowed, where we can and do go about our business in free association in our social and cultural life without fear, and where the religion of COVIDianity is as dead and buried as Mithraism. Although some, of course, may claim that Mithraism is alive and well in secret cults, but we won't go there right now. Okay, let's say the worship of Apollo. I don't think there are too many out there now. People worshipping the god Apollo. You get my point, I think. Right?
You're shaping up, Basil, to be the Salman Rushdie of 2020. What a heretical thing to say. You've rejected the Branch Covidian completely.
You know, and the disease along with it.
You're such a heretic. Heretic. Oh, it's just like a Monty Python film, half of this. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
It is getting
It is getting like that. It's getting silly. Now, it's getting long in the tooth, though, in a lot of places. And, you know, the dominoes could also fall because they are really pushing this thing way over the cliff of reality, basically. So it's not all bad. I am holding out some hope. I think if after this election, it could also subside. So there's a lot of people that are trying to keep COVID going until this election because, as we said in the first segment, on this live broadcast, if you missed any of the live broadcast, you can listen to the show on the podcasting format up at 21 Wire, at iTunes, and other locations later after the show. But what I said before is that there's a number of reasons why this and other things are being used to manipulate the U.S. election results, which so many people want so badly to manipulate in one direction or the other, mainly in the direction to get rid of Donald Trump. I do think the crisis could very well subside if, a winner is declared one way or the other after November 3rd. So if we survive that long, to be quite honest. But anyway, Basil, I want to say thank you very much for joining us for this historic episode of the Sunday Wire.
Thank you, Patrick.
Great as always. The wisdom and the insight of Brother Basil is just unparalleled, really. Especially, we need such great sages and shamans in this time of great tumult. So we really appreciate our roving correspondent for culture, sport, and religion, Mr. Basil Valentine. This has been a fantastic show. I want to thank everybody for joining us. And also want to thank all of our listeners, our readers at 21stcenturywire.com. We'll be back with more articles and stories this week. We've been working on a few things. I haven't published a few of the pieces that I talked about last week. Those will be published this week. So look forward to those. And also thank you, everybody, subscribers, members, people donating to this platform. I want to say thank you very much. Your support is greatly valued, and it's helping us to go and do the work that we need to do going forward. But also, I want to say as well, thank you to the amazing team at ACR, the Alternate Current Radio Network. ACR needs your support. There's a lot of loyal ACR listeners that listen to the show. Thank you very much for your support to the network and to the Boiler Room and all of its other great programming on this platform, but also become a patron or donate to the Alternate Current Radio Network. There's a link at the top of our show page that will take you to ACR's website. You can go through the menu there and how you can support this great independent radio platform. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's the show. That's all we've got time for. Thank you to everybody for attending this first sermon of the First Universal Church of the New Normal and the Sacred Tabernacle of the Holy Corona. I am your host, Archbishop. No, forget it. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Take care. Stay sane. Be well. We'll hope to see you next week. All the best.